The council executed a human child on live broadcast. 27 minutes later, humanity broke the galaxy. The dark glass spires of the obsidian tier vault hummed with a low magnetic current that ran through 10,000 worlds. Inside the grand circle, the air smelled of metallic dust and the sharp sting of ion-filtered light. High Arbitrator Xylervos tilted his gray chitinous carapace forward, his yellow sensory pits glowing like dead stars as he pulled the primary command slate toward his claws. Opposite him, the human representative stood completely still. The council was about to execute a human child on a live broadcast to 60 sectors, and the galaxy was watching to see if Earth would beg. Xylervos did not look at the viewer screens. He tapped the obsidian glass panel, his heavy claws clicking twice against the display. With a swift, level slide of his middle digit, he deleted the digital access signatures for the entire Sol transit grid. The blue light representing Earth's trade routes flickered once, turned a dull gray, and vanished from the cosmic map. 30 billion people on the outer colonies were stripped of their automated logistics lines in a single second. The economic lifeline of a species was simply wiped from the central registry. "Your digital identity is revoked," Xylervos said, his voice a series of dry, rhythmic clicks that translated into flat English across the chamber floor. "The Krintesh Directorate has reclaimed the core relay array. Without a network signature, your ships cannot clear the orbital shrouds. Your outposts have 24 hours to sign the total submission charter, or the automated supply hubs will freeze your atmospheric processors." Director Tariq Al-Jamal did not shout. He did not call for a point of order or look at the high gallery where the alien delegates watched from their shadow boxes. He slowly rotated a plain, unpolished carbon fiber wedding band around his left ring finger. It was a rhythmic, mechanical habit that made no sound against the skin. Then his hand went flat against the black stone table. "You built your entire dominion on the belief that the box could never be opened from the outside," Al-Jamal said. His voice was level, almost conversational, lacking any trace of the panic the assembly had expected. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a 3-inch strand of unpolished copper grounding wire, rough and braided at the ends. He dropped the scrap metal onto the polished obsidian table, right over the line where the digital boundary had just been erased. "We didn't open it. We just took the hinges off." Xylervos tilted his head, his yellow eye pits narrowing at the tiny piece of industrial salvage. "A dead filament cannot carry an appeal, Director. Your network is dead." Al-Jamal did not answer. He turned his back on the High Arbitrator, left the braided wire on the table, and walked out of the chamber into an absolute, unbothered silence. Would you have stayed, or would you have run? Because he didn't run. The sky is about to go completely quiet and you need to hear exactly how the current turns. Stay close. The long transport corridor outside the vault was cool and empty. Al-Jamal's boots made regular, dull impacts against the grated floorboards as he walked toward the hangar bays. 14 years ago, when the first human survey vessels had logged the coordinates of the core relay array, the engineers hadn't looked at the code. They had looked at the physical conduits. They had noted how every automated system in the hegemony relied on a single, centralized frequency loop to authorize its ignition keys. Now, back in the subterranean terminal of the Sol transit grid, 3 light-years away, the main diagnostic boards showed nothing but zeroed fields. To the automated scanners of the Krintesh fleet hovering in the upper atmosphere, Earth looked like a house whose lights had been turned off from the street. The automated trade freighters sat dead in their berths, their communication dishes locked in a diagnostic loop. Inside the operational bunker of Earth's deep-site infrastructure defense, the air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee and hot-circuit insulation. There were no holographic displays here. No light arrays or centralized quantum networks linked this room to the wider galaxy. Instead, rows of thick, insulated cables ran along the concrete walls like exposed veins, terminating in heavy mechanical switches made of slate and brass. "The Directorate has confirmed the blockade," a technician said from the central desk, her fingers tapping a mechanical keyboard that gave off a sharp, rhythmic clack. The orbital shroud is fully active over the third colony. They've cut the automated logistics feed. Keep the transmitters dead, Al-Jamal said as he walked through the heavy blast doors. He did not take off his coat. He walked straight to the primary distribution rack, where a thick, unpolished copper bar crossed the main breaker assembly. Let them read the silence as compliance. How many dark fiber lines are showing continuous continuity? All sectors are reporting green on the physical loops, sir, she replied. The outer rim vaults have finished the manual cross-connects. The relays are insulated. No frequency emissions. For 12 hours, the galaxy saw a ghost. On the grand monitors of the capital station, the analysts of the high hegemony drafted resource allocation plans for a compliant, broken territory. They argued over the distribution of human mining assets and divided the fuel reserves of the outer colonies on digital ledger slates. To an empire that lived entirely inside the network, a species that did not transmit simply did not exist. But far out in the black, beneath the shadow of the binary pulsar, a nonlinear reality was taking shape. A small, unmonitored human supply hauler drifted in the dead space near Sector Relay 11. It carried no active transponder. Its reactor was throttled down to a cold, manual idle that gave off less heat than a stray asteroid. Inside the hauler's maintenance bay, two technicians in thick, unpowered pressure suits worked by the light of handheld lanterns. They didn't touch a console. One of them used a manual wrench to bolt a massive, insulated junction box directly onto the raw hull plating. Inside the box lay a duplicate of the braided copper wire Al-Jamal had left on the council table. Only this one was 4 inches thick and anchored to a massive mechanical ground plate. Relay connection is secure, the first technician whispered through a localized, hard-wired helmet comm. The hegemony backbone line is right beneath the casing. They haven't checked the physical shielding since the last century. They don't think anyone can find it without a network probe, the second replied, using a manual lever to pierce the outer insulation of the alien relay conduit. There was no spark, no alarm triggered on the capital station. The mechanical tap simply pressed flat against the high-voltage core of the Empire's military grid, waiting for a circuit to close. Back in the obsidian tier vault, Zyler sat before his glowing monitors, reviewing the trade data from the occupied sectors. Everything was orderly. The gray zones on his map remained gray, indicating zero response from the human sectors. The silence was perfect. It was the exact response the Directorate had documented from 100 other client races before their final submission. A minor notification flashed on the lower corner of his display, a tiny, pale blue line that didn't match the standard system log. The arbitrator frowned, his yellow eye pits tightening as he tapped the slate to clear it. The notification did not clear. It was a physical metric, an unprogrammed reading from the station's baseline power distribution grid. "Why is the core relay showing a variance?" Zyler asked, his clicks echoing off the dark glass walls of his personal office. A junior network technician at the lower tier turned her carapace toward the platform. "It is within acceptable margins, High Arbitrator. A minor fluctuation in the secondary military backbone, a voltage drop of less than 0.5%. "Trace it," Zyler ordered, his upper carapace tilting forward slightly. "The human sector has been dark for hours. I want no unmonitored variables on the core array before the final execution broadcast." "The reading is gone, sir," the technician reported after a moment, her claws moving quickly over the glass interface. The system balanced itself out. It was likely a localized thermal discharge near the outer rim vaults. The arbitrator went back to his ledger. He did not notice that the gray zones on his map were no longer empty. They were merely quiet. Across 14,000 light-years, 300 hidden human ships had reached their manual anchoring points along the primary military grid. They were not firing missiles. They were not scanning the enemy hulls. They were simply running unpolished copper grounding lines directly into the primary ignition matrix of the galaxy's largest fleet. Director Al Jamal stood before the concrete wall of the Earth bunker, his eyes fixed on a mechanical clock whose brass gears clicked steadily toward the hour. The wedding band on his finger remained still. He reached out and placed his palm against the heavy iron handle of the main cutoff switch. 24 hours are up, Al Jamal said. The massive iron handle did not give under his hand yet. Tariq Al Jamal held the weight of the breaker steady, his skin cold against the unpolished surface. Beside him, the mechanical clock gave one final, heavy click as its brass tooth dropped into the slot. The 24 hours given by the high hegemony had run out down to the second. In the upper tier of the capital station, the central displays began their automated tally. High Arbitrator Zylervos adjusted his upper carapace, leaning closer to the terminal as the countdown reached 0. The screen remained gray across the human territory. No data stream moved from Earth. No panic-stricken appeals for resource sharing arrived in the queue. "The submission window is closed," Zylervos clicked, his deep-set pits glowing a satisfied, steady yellow. He touched the master slate to authorize the final phase of the blockade. They chose starvation over integration, locked the atmospheric controls on their mining outposts, let the silence become permanent. The junior network technician at the lower console did not slide the key. Her fingers stayed frozen over the glass interface as a new line of telemetry overrode the command sequence. It was not a code transmission. It was a localized, heavy ground pulse that vibrated right through the obsidian floorboards of the vault. "The automated authorization loops are not responding, High Arbitrator," she said, her head tilting back in a sudden gesture of confusion. "The commands are loading into the queue, but the fleet relays are failing to execute the signature handshake." Zylervos snorted, a dry spray of clicking sounds escaping his throat. "The human sector is dark. They have no network presence to block a command line. Cycle the main military backbone again." He did not know that 3 light-years away, inside a small, unmonitored freighter, a physical circuit had just completed its path. The manual iron switch in Earth's deep-site infrastructure defense went down with a heavy, metallic slam. A massive surge of raw, unshielded current, carried along miles of secret, insulated dark fiber lines, rushed backward into the Empire's primary grid. The strategy was simple, built entirely on the blind spot of an empire that had forgotten the physical reality of electricity. The high hegemony had spent centuries engineering every system to run on wireless, centralized data frequencies. They had removed the heavy, primitive grounding mechanisms from their infrastructure to save weight, believing no one could touch a network that required a digital key to access. They had mistaken Earth's manual, hardwired backup systems for primitive inability. Now that vulnerability was wide open. The unpolished copper grounding wires manually tapped into the core relay array did not care about access codes. They did not try to hack the encryption or bypass the digital firewalls. They simply offered the high-voltage current of the military grid a shortcut to the ground. Across Sector 4, the flagship of the Krintesh Directorate drifted in its high orbital lane. Its massive plasma cannons were cycled to active, their barrels glowing with the pale blue energy of a network-linked charge. The commander stood on the bridge, his sensory pits fixed on the planetary display below, waiting for the final clearance to drop the shroud. The lights on the bridge did not flicker, they died instantly. The hum of the sublight reactors vanished from the deck plates, replaced by a heavy, breathless quiet. The tactical displays went black, taking with them the targeting telemetry, the interfleet communication bandwidth, and the orbital positioning systems. "Report," the commander clicked, his claws scraping against the dead metal of his command chair. "Switch to backup batteries. Re-establish the network link with the capital station." "The batteries are drained, sir," the tactical officer replied, his voice thin and erratic. The moment the primary loop broke, the entire reserve charge was pulled directly through the hull plates. The power didn't fail because of a bug. It was physically dragged out of the system. The crew sat in the dark, their gray chitinous armor scraping against each other as they realized the emergency hatches were sealed by automated safety locks that required an active current to release. They were trapped inside 30,000 tons of unpowered military alloy, drifting on the edge of a gravitational well with no way to cycle their engines. Back in the Obsidian Tier vault, the dramatic irony was reaching its peak. Xyler Voss stood before his master terminal, his claws hitting the glass surface over and over. The map was changing, but not in the way his strategy had predicted. The gray zones representing Earth's territory remained exactly where they were, but the bright blue indicators of his own fleet were beginning to drop off the display like dying sparks. The primary military backbone is losing voltage, the junior technician reported, her clicks rising in pitch as she watched the diagnostic fields. The drain has reached 12%. Sector 7 is reporting total fleet silence. Sector 9 is no longer broadcasting its position. This is a localized sabotage, Xyler Voss hissed, his carapace tilting forward until his yellow pits were inches from the glass. Deploy the reserve interceptors from the capital spire. Cut the power to the outer rim relays manually if you must. We cannot send the launch signal, sir, she said. Her hands were shaking now, her claws slipping on the stone console. The capital spire's ignition loops are tied to the same core relay array. The matrix is loading the command, but the circuit won't close. Every bit of power we send down the line is vanishing into the human sector. The arbitrator looked at the main view screen that covered the entire front wall of the vault. The live broadcast that was supposed to show the economic execution of a younger race was still active, but the camera feeds from the outer colonies were dead. In their place, the grand display showed a single, static image of the capital station's upper docking bays. The massive defense platforms, engineered to protect the high core from any fleet invasion, were rotating slowly on their mounts. They weren't tracking an incoming human fleet. Their automated guidance systems were completely dark, their long barrels pointed at the empty void, while their internal coolant loops began to vent pale white vapor into space. Inside the Earth bunker, Tariq al-Jamal did not celebrate. He watched the mechanical indicators on the concrete wall as they registered the massive inflow of stolen current. The ground plates beneath the floorboards were hot now, giving off a dry, mineral smell that filled the small room. Hegemony fleet movement has ceased across all central sectors, the technician at the mechanical keyboard stated. Her voice was level, matching the discipline of the room. The automated relays are dropping off the network at a rate of 50 nodes per second. Their war machine is freezing in place. They will try to use the manual overrides in their civilian sectors, Al-Jamal said, his finger tracing the carbon fiber ring on his left hand. Ensure the backup lines we ran into their medical and transport grids remain insulated. We are here to pull the plug on their weapons, not their people. The civilian infrastructure is completely separated, sir. The dark fiber loops are holding the current away from their planetary colonies. Only the military channels are carrying the ground. The door to the vault on the capital station began to hiss as the pneumatic seals lost their pressure. Xyler Voss turned around, his sensory pits flaring a dangerous, deep crimson as the heavy stone panels slid open by hand. A senior military analyst stumbled into the chamber, his chitinous chest plate cracked along the lower edge where an emergency lever had been forced. He did not look at the high gallery or the remaining alien delegates who were whispering in their boxes. He looked straight at the high arbitrator. The human representative didn't leave the station, the analyst clicked, his voice breaking through the low-frequency static that had begun to hum from the light fixtures. His shuttle never left the orbital berth. He is still inside the primary network hub beneath our feet, and he isn't alone. Zyler Voss felt a sudden, cold weight drop through his three-chambered heart. The small strand of copper wire was still sitting on the obsidian table before him, catching the fading light of the dying terminals. It was a physical promise, a shadow that had been growing under his feet for 14 years while he had been looking at data screens. "Find them," the arbitrator commanded, his voice dropping to a low, desperate whisper. "Take every guard we have left in the high core. Use manual weapons. If the human representative closes the secondary breaker, the entire capital spire will lose its magnetic stability." The analyst did not move. He pointed a trembling claw at the main monitor on the wall. The static image of the docking bays had vanished, replaced by a live, low-resolution diagnostic feed from the station's deepest maintenance level. Tariq Al-Jamal was standing in the center of the vault, his hand resting on a heavy copper conduit that bypassed the primary security terminal entirely. He looked directly into the camera lens, his face perfectly still in the dim, green emergency light of the subfloor. The lens of the deep sight camera did not blink, and neither did the man standing behind it. Tariq Al-Jamal raised his left hand in the green glare of the subfloor, his fingers resting lightly against the black housing of the primary sector bypass switch. Through the glass window behind him, the thick copper cables that had been laid into the station's framework over 14 years began to vibrate, their heavy insulation sweating under the sudden pressure of an unshielded current. He was not looking at a tactical map. He was looking directly into the High Council's live broadcast feed. In the Obsidian Tier vault, the crimson light in High Arbitrator Zyler Voss's sensory pits grew dark. His heavy gray claws bit into the stone edge of his desk, cracking the polished finish as he leaned toward the central monitor. The human representative was supposed to be trapped in a starving system 3 light-years away, waiting for his colonies to freeze. Instead, he was standing inside the very heart of the Empire's power node, his palm flat against the master breaker. "You are trespassing in a high-security military vault, Director," Zyler Voss clicked, his translation voice coming through the station's backup speakers with a sharp, metallic rattle. "The automated security platform has already logged your biosignature. If you pull that lever, the internal plasma turrets will vent the entire subfloor with high thermal gas. You will not leave that room alive." Al-Jamal did not move his hand. He didn't look up at the automated defense pods hanging from the ceiling grid. "The turrets require an active command frequency to cycle their valves, Arbitrator. We took that frequency offline 12 minutes ago." He reached out with his other hand, took a small pair of insulated pliers from his pocket, and gripped the small copper grounding wire he had run into the primary ignition matrix. It was an ordinary, industrial tool, its rubber handles worn thin by years of manual labor in the Outer Rim shipyards. He didn't issue an ultimatum. He didn't make a speech for the live cameras. He simply twisted the metal strand 1/4 turn to the left. The world went absolutely still. At exactly 0400, the manual switches across 60 sectors completed their ground path. The dread bomb did not hit with an explosion or a flash of light. It landed as a silent, sweeping erasure that crossed the galaxy in less than a millisecond. On the master terminal in the high vault, the numbers began to drop. The blue indicators for 14,200 automated military relays did not flicker. They vanished from the screen simultaneously. It was a clean, surgical blackout that took the entire Krintesh war machine with it. One moment the Empire held the absolute military leverage over 30 billion people. The next, their entire fleet was reduced to an unpowered collection of floating metal boxes. Zyler Voss stood up, his massive 7-foot frame shaking as the primary gravity grid inside the capital station failed. The heavy stone floor beneath his claws tilted slightly, the magnetic stabilizers losing their grip on the station's core. Around the grand circle, the alien delegates scrambled to hold onto their shadow boxes as the lights died, leaving the vault illuminated only by the pale, cold glare of the emergency battery packs. "The fleet," the arbitrator hissed, his clicks losing their rhythmic pattern. "Get me a line to the flagship. Tell them to drop the orbital shroud over Earth manually." "There is no line, sir," the junior technician replied from the darkness below. Her voice was flat with terror, her hands moving over a console that gave off nothing but a dead, gray reflection. "The flagship has stopped broadcasting its telemetry. Every dreadnought along the main military backbone has lost its system ignition. They aren't answering the emergency handshake." Out in the deep void of Sector 4, the failure was absolute. The massive Krintesh fleet, engineered to enforce the digital blockade, drifted in a dead, uncoordinated cluster against the backdrop of the binary pulsar. Their screens were black. Their weapons grids were frozen in mid-charge, the pale blue plasma cooling inside the barrels because there was no current to push it forward. The strategy had not targeted their civilian populations. Down on the planetary colonies, the lights in the hospitals remained active, the public transport grids running on separate, insulated dark fiber lines that the human technicians had left untouched. The precision of the blackout was terrifying. The human defense teams had pulled the plug on the weapons while leaving the lifelines open. But for the military crew trapped inside the dead hulls, the silence was a physical weight. They could hear the metal plates contracting in the cold of space, the automated air scrubbers dropping to manual maintenance mode with a low, dying whistle. They had spent their lives operating inside a centralized network where every action was verified by a distant quantum core. Without that wire, they didn't even know how to open a hatch. Inside the station's deeper maintenance level, Al Jamal stepped away from the conduit. He did not look back at the camera. He walked through the open blast doors toward the secondary maintenance lift, his boots clicking in a slow, steady rhythm against the iron floorboards. The mid-collapse rehook dropped into the high vault like a cold scalpel. A single line of text appeared on Zyler Voss's personal slate, bypassing the dark system through a low-frequency, hardwired link that had been forgotten since the station was built. It was a raw data drop, but it didn't contain military metrics or ship counts. It was a localized timestamp from the Outer Rim vaults, followed by a single, unprogrammed variable that recontextualized everything the Directorate had logged over 14 years. The reading showed a continuous, steady voltage rise along the station's main structural framework, a metric that should have been impossible with the main reactors offline. The human defense teams hadn't just grounded the military network. They had rewritten the physical loop of the entire Capitol spire. The current wasn't vanishing into the void anymore. It was building up inside the very metal of the vault walls, turning the obsidian pillars into a massive, live battery that was drawing its charge from the Empire's remaining reserve vaults. "They aren't trying to disable the station," Zyler Voss clicked, his yellow sensory pits flaring a deep, unyielding crimson as he realized the true scale of the trap. "They are grounding the core to the bedrock of the sector. If the voltage hits the threshold, the magnetic seals on our primary pulsar dampeners will release." The open loop was live now, and it would not close until the final charter was signed. The entire high core was no longer a safe bunker. It was a physical circuit that was closing down around them day by day, hour by hour, while the silent human fleet waited in the shadows of the Outer Rim. A junior analyst ran into the dark chamber, his chitinous carapace covered in gray dust from the lower decks. He did not bow. He did not wait for the arbitrator to speak. "The human defense haulers have entered the Capitol perimeter, sir," he gasped, his clicks breaking into uneven fragments. "They aren't launching missiles. They are running thick, unpolished copper cables directly from their utility ships into our docking rings. They are manually hardwiring their own security laws into our central terminal." Zyler Voss looked down at the small piece of braided wire that still sat on his desk, cold and unbothered in the shadows. The younger species hadn't come to argue over the digital blockade or file an appeal to the High Council. They had come with insulated pliers and spools of raw wire to change the rules of the galaxy by hand. Director Aljamal stepped out of the maintenance lift into the rear of the grand chamber, his long coat damp with the moisture of the subfloor. He did not carry a weapon. He had no guards behind him. He walked toward the central table where the braided copper wire lay, his face perfectly level as he looked across the dark vault at the 7-foot arbitrator. "The 24 hours are up, Voss," Aljamal said. His voice carried across the silent room without the aid of a microphone, flat, cold, and absolute. "Now we talk about the new order." High Arbitrator Zyler Voss did not move from his tilted position behind the master desk. His yellow sensory pits were small and dim in the gray emergency light, watching the human approach the center of the vault floor. Around the high circle, the alien delegates sat in the absolute stillness of a cold room. The central display behind Tariq Al-Jamal was still active, showing the live feed of the capital station's upper docking bay where the unpowered dreadnoughts hung like dead stone. Al-Jamal reached the table and picked up the small 3-inch strand of unpolished copper grounding wire he had left there hours before. He did not pull a weapon. He did not wave a document. He took a heavy white porcelain coffee mug from the center of the desk, tilted it to ensure it was empty, and set it down exactly over the line where the digital boundary had been deleted. "Your automated blockade is over," Al-Jamal said. His voice was flat, lacking any trace of theatrical anger. "The Sol transit grid has re-established its manual trade routes. The outer colonies are no longer within your directory." Zyler Voss clicked, a dry, mechanical rattle that came from his upper carapace rather than his speech matrix. "You have disabled our fleet relays, Director, but a network blackout does not change the law. The Krintesh Directorate still holds the sovereign charter to this sector. If our systems cycle back to active, the execution order remains valid." "The charter requires an active terminal to enforce," Al-Jamal replied, his finger slowly tracing the carbon fiber ring on his left hand. "We didn't come to change your mind, arbitrator. We came to change the bedrock." Behind him, the heavy iron plates of the vault floor groaned as the manual lines below reached their full capacity. Down in the deepest subfloor, a junior field technician named Zoya, the very intern whose registry name had been marked for deletion, pulled a heavy copper lever that bypassed the station's remaining digital firewalls. She did not look at the tactical monitors. She looked at a manual dial that measured the pure, physical flow of voltage into the station's primary pulsar dampeners. The climax hit without a single explosive signature. The unpolished copper grounding lines that had been run into the Capitol spire did not carry data. They carried an irreversible physical current. No warning, no declaration, no mercy. The blue indicators on the master terminal did not flicker. They turned a dead, solid gray as the Offline Sovereignty Act was permanently hardwired into the central core. The Empire's centralized network framework was broken from the inside out, its automated authorization loops frozen by a sovereign current that did not recognize a digital key. Zyler Voss watched his personal monitors turn completely blank. The yellow light in his sensory pits flared once, then died down to a thin, pale circle as the magnetic stability of his personal bunker began to drop. His four-lobed brain could not track a systemic collapse that left his people safe while rendering his weapons completely useless. "The grid did not fail because of a bug, arbitrator," Al-Jamal said, his voice dropping into the cold silence of the vault. "It failed because a foundation built on theft cannot withstand a sovereign current." The aftermath stayed cold and tense, the dread holding high through the chamber as the alien delegates realized the true scale of the shift. The younger human species had not come to steal the Empire's fire. They had come to remind them that the ground always claims the current in the end. The old order was gone, replaced by a decentralized framework where no council mandate could cross the threshold of a localized, hardwired network without physical consent. Al-Jamal turned away from the desk, his long coat catching the gray light of the dying terminals as he walked toward the open exit. He did not look back at the High Arbitrator or the remaining delegates who sat in their shadow boxes. His boots made regular, level impacts against the stone floorboards as he left the chamber, his work finished down to the final turn of the wire. In the dim, battery-powered shelter of the deepest subfloor, Zyler Voss sat alone before a dead diagnostic screen. The massive 7-foot arbitrator did not click. His gray chitinous carapace was still, his deep-set pits fixed on the floor where a human technician was manually routing a safe, isolated line to his medical systems, with nothing but a pair of insulated pliers and a spool of raw wire. The whole sky was quiet because the grounding wire ran straight through the primary ignition matrix. The Capitol's spire was still, its dark glass spires catching the distant, cold light of the binary pulsar, while the unpowered fleet drifted in the black. She set the page on the recording stand. She did not file it. The word faced up, counted.